So back to what I was saying, this slope represents the rate of increase or the increase in property tax revenues. And the effects then began to level off. And what we see because of Senate Bill 2, that flattens and begins to approach the downward slope rather than the upward slope. But because of the four factors that I said earlier, this call volume and call response curve is continuing to rise at a rather steady rate. And in fact, the more people that we bring in, the rate gets more, the slope gets steeper, headed in the wrong direction. There's a collision coming. And that's what we have to be aware of as we move through this and begin to prepare for this. So obviously, we began transporting in 2017, and that was this huge jump up because of the number of responses. But I don't want to portray, and we shouldn't portray to those who have interest or ask questions, it wasn't just because the ambulances hit the road. Remember, we were doing first response EMS even before 2017. Obviously, with us transporting, our commitment to service has gotten a lot greater. So before that problem, why did we even get into EMS? And Mike, you'll recall that what we were faced with was the fact that prior to us putting ambulances on the road, we only had 2 units stationed in the district. So 40% of the time, we did not have advanced life support or the ability to move patients to the hospital. And that's what caused us to move in that direction. In those early days, we talked about developing a 3-way partnership between the city of Pflugerville, Travis County, and the district. The political air of that time was not conducive to it, but there was no improvement to service. In fact, over time, the problem was going to get greater because, again, more people, more calls, but we just didn't have the way to do it. We ended up doing the business all together ourselves. So rather than augmenting an existing service, we ended up holding the bag completely. So we've gone from having 2 ambulances supplied by somebody else to 5 that we operate 24/7. So drawing this together, the funding mechanism that was designed by the state legislature, first as rural fire prevention districts and then emergency service districts, was really put together as an answer to volunteer fire departments in rural areas that didn't have heavy call volumes. And it did exactly that. And this district is no different than so many more of the others in that we started as a volunteer service. But this district began to change in demographics and population, and the idea of doing bake sales and barbecues and street dances became not even remotely realistic because the firefighters were having to do those fundraisers as well as running calls. The other thing to remember is that we operate pretty much like a municipal service, a municipal fire department in a city. And it's been demonstrated that municipal fire departments operate anywhere from 24 to 45 cents, if that's translated into a tax rate on their cost. And generally those rates, in fact, more than generally, most often, that rate would be for M&O only. And remembering that as an ESD, we not only have to do maintenance and operation, we have to do our debt service out of that same dime. So it stretches it pretty thin. So while we're on financial footing at this point in time, and we are working with reserves, the long range effects of COVID-19 are what we have to, we don't have to focus on COVID-19 over the long range. Our biggest problem is focusing on correcting the course with Senate Bill 2 and how we began to change that picture. One last slide. If you look at where we are, and we began to tell you last year that in 23 and FY24 and 25 is when things are going to get really serious for us. Once again, in doing forecasting out across the coming fiscal years, the green bar represents our projected revenues against our projected expenditures, and the ending balance is this red column. And so what begins to happen is erosion of our reserve funds to continue operations. And certainly in 23 and 24, that's when we go critical. So in kind of closing this whole thing out, we discussed last year what to do, and I want to stop the share. So as we close out this whole idea in 2019 in our planning conference, we devoted a great deal of time in talking about how we adjust that imbalance given what we could do. So if we talk about it, deeper cuts in our budget actually begin to translate now into services that we provide. We've been working on cutting the budget everywhere we can. We've been doing that for a number of years. You know, one of our big programs right now is our preventive maintenance systems, where we adopted a philosophy, I guess about 5 years ago, that it was better to do preventive maintenance than to wait until you're doing repairs. And that was particularly true with our fleet maintenance. We didn't really get worried about them until they didn't run anymore. Now we have a comprehensive program that takes care of the truck before it breaks down. Also less expensive with that aspect of it. One of the other things that we're talking about, and this will be a big item in the coming time, is we're beginning to talk about refurbishing existing engines. When I first took over the reins as fire chief, the average age of our fleet was 20 plus years. And I vowed early on to begin to reverse that trend, and we certainly have done that. But instead of buying new trucks and replacements, we've begun to pursue what does it mean to rebuild a fire truck from the ground up, and what are the cost savings associated with it. So those, I think, are just 2 examples of some of the things that we're doing. One of the other things that we talked about in 2019, and you'll see that come forward in the budget as we propose it to you in the coming weeks, and that's raising fees for service. And we are examining that now. We're looking at what other people are doing around us with regard to charging for the services that we provide. That certainly includes, you know, the rides on the ambulance. But I don't want to pretend to tell you that we'll be able to recover all those costs. You know, even the best of services out there only recover about 40%, 45% of the cost of making an ambulance run, because certainly not all patients are capable of paying. And we're going to have to continue to look at that and see how we develop it. Once again, we'll be coming to you in this year's budget with that. The other thing is that there's talk, and we have several districts in Travis County that have kind of seen this problem coming, and in some cases, they were really against the wall when they talked about it, and overlay districts were made possible in those districts, and the philosophy behind them is what they are set up now is in an overlay situation, one district funds the fire side of it, and the other district funds the EMS side of it. What I have to caution you, and what we need to be really aware of, though, that's not a commissioner fix. And I you know, maybe that's a new term. That's not a fix that the commissioners, the Board of Commissioners, can put in place for our district. Overlay district, another district, has to be come from the grassroots, if you will. And I know that we began as a grassroots effort, but once again, an overlay district is something that we can't just say, here's our fix, and it gets done. So we have to be careful in going forward with that. But I wanted you to have this view of what we're doing right now with respect to our budget, what kinds of information that we put together to lay out so that we can begin to address what we are doing and how we do it into the future. And that, I think, kind of summarizes my report, unless there's questions.
I didn't have a question, Ron, but I do want to thank you all for these two graphs, or the graph and then the bar chart. The collision point of the revenue and the responses, that's a simple tell of what our issue is. And then seeing on the other chart where we fall, just chewing up our reserves. We're already chewing up our reserves right now. That we cannot continue doing that. So obviously the department's going to do everything, but we've got to find a solution. But this is really helpful because it really illustrates the dilemma. So.
Right, Mike. And what I will share with you is the whole COVID thing, I think, has kind of amplified this and got everybody pointed in a direction. Tomorrow I'll be sending to you our chronicle of our COVID activity to date, but let's not get all caught up in COVID. The bigger problem is what we're seeing in the future, and we saw it coming before.
Right. Anyway, again, thank you. This is very helpful.